In the upper room of a London townhouse, the baby sleeps beneath a white counterpane stitched so finely that every thread seems to belong to a cleaner world. The nursery fire has been banked for the night. A copper warming pan has passed through the sheets. The curtains are heavy enough to hold back the wet city air, and the cradle stands near the hearth, painted pale and polished by hands that did not own it. On a small table beside it, there is a silver rattle, a folded flannel binder, a brush with soft bristles, a bottle of rose water, and a little stack of napkins boiled, dried, and folded into perfect squares. Downstairs, the household has gone quiet. The father's boots have been taken away by a servant. The mother's gown has been brushed and hung. The lamps have been turned low. Somewhere beyond the windows, horses move over stones slick with rain. But here the child is wrapped in warmth, wool, milk, and watchfulness. He does not know his own privilege yet. He only knows that when he cries, someone comes. Not always his mother. Often, not his mother at all. Across the city, or perhaps only a few streets away. Another baby lies in a room that has no nursery name. There may be no cradle, only a drawer pulled from a chest, a basket lined with old cloth, or a corner of a mattress shared with too many bodies. The air is colder. The linen is rougher. The fire, if there is one, is smaller. The milk is uncertain. The mother is absent. That absence has been explained in respectable terms. She has gone into service. She has taken a position. She has found employment in a good house. She is fortunate, people may say, if the family is decent and the wages are regular. A young woman with a child and no dependable husband cannot be too proud. A poor mother must think practically. Hunger does not soften itself because the heart is breaking. In the fine nursery, the maid bends over another woman's child. She may be called a nursemaid. She may be a nursery maid. In some houses, if her body can provide milk, she may be hired as a wet nurse, examined, questioned, and judged by the quality of what nature has made from her poverty. Even when she is not feeding the child from her breast, she feeds him with time that cannot be divided. She lifts him, washes him, walks him, soothes him through fever, carries him past windows, learns the shape of his cries, and stands awake while the household sleeps. The rich child grows inside a circle of care. The poor child grows outside it. This is the first quiet cruelty. Not a locked door, not a scream in the night, not a villain twisting his hands in a dark room. It is only a woman standing where the system has placed her, holding the baby who can afford her care while her own baby waits somewhere cheaper. Victorian Britain liked to speak of duty. It loved order, family, motherhood, discipline, Christian feeling, and the moral improvement of the poor. It built grand homes with nurseries at the top, servant bells in the walls, and back stairs that allowed labor to move unseen. It praised domestic virtue while buying it by the month from women who could not afford to keep enough of it for themselves. The household called it an arrangement. Her body understood it as a loss. By the end of this story, the warm nursery will not look quite so innocent. The clean linen will carry another meaning. The sleeping child will still be a child, blameless and beloved, but the care surrounding him will reveal its hidden price. Behind every softened pillow, every soothed cry, every respectable household account, there may have been another room, another infant, another mother counting the hours she could not get back. And somewhere in that distance, the child who was not chosen by wealth may have cried too. Only fewer people were paid to hear it. To understand why this could happen in a respectable house, one has to enter the Victorian mind without forgiving it too easily. A household was not simply a place to live. For the comfortable classes, it was a display of order. The dining room showed taste. The parlor showed manners. The nursery showed continuity. A family with servants did not merely have help. It had evidence of rank, stability, and proper management. The bells, the back stairs, the polished grates, the folded linen, the separate entrances, all formed a quiet language of class. In that language, A nursemaid did not appear as a woman with a torn private life. She appeared as part of the machinery of a well-run home. A young mother of means was expected to be tender, moral, and watchful, but not necessarily sleepless, stained, or exhausted. There were duties considered suitable for her, and duties considered beneath her. She might visit the nursery, kiss the child, hear reports, supervise instruction, approve clothing, and correct behavior, yet much of the bodily work of childhood could be passed downward. The poor woman carried what gentility did not want to touch. She washed nappies. She sat through night crying. She cleaned vomit from muslin. She held a teething child whose gums made him frantic. She walked the corridor until her feet burned. If she served in a wealthier household, she might take the child out in a perambulator, carefully dressed to reflect the family's status, while her own shoes were wearing thin beneath her skirt. There was nothing secret about this. Household manuals, advice books, advertisements, and employment columns treated it as ordinary. Families sought reliable girls for nursery service. Mothers were advised on selecting servants with good temper, clean habits, obedience, and moral character. The servant's body, voice, health, patience, and reputation were all open to judgment because she would be placed close to the children of her betters. The children of the poor, however, attracted a different kind of attention. They appeared in reform reports, charity appeals, workhouse records, and court cases when something had already gone wrong. They were counted when they became a burden, inspected when they became sick, pitied when they became useful to a moral argument, and forgotten when they simply survived. Victorian respectability was skilled at separating these two facts. A rich child needed constant care. A poor child needed its mother too. Only the first need could hire someone. Medical belief also gave the arrangement a calmer face. In cases of wet nursing, some physicians and families spoke of the quality of milk as though it could be managed like a household supply. A wet nurse might be chosen for her apparent health, her complexion, her teeth, her age, her recent childbirth, and her moral habits. If a lady was too weak, too fashionable, too ill, or too socially occupied to nurse, another woman's milk could be treated as a practical solution. The language could be astonishingly clean. The employer was not taking a mother away from her infant. She was securing nourishment for her own. She was protecting a delicate baby. She was following medical advice. She was acting as a responsible parent. The fact that the nurse's own child might be sent out to be dry nursed, bottle-fed with unsafe mixtures, left with relatives, or placed in conditions far worse than those enjoyed by the employer's child did not always disturb the surface of the arrangement. The system did not need cruelty to speak loudly. It needed respectable phrases. Service was opportunity. Obedience was character. Separation was necessity. A poor woman's grief was unfortunate, but not central. Religion could soften the same structure without dismantling it. The mistress might see herself as charitable for hiring a poor girl rather than leaving her unemployed. She might donate old baby clothes, offer moral instruction, or expect gratitude for a place under her roof. A servant who behaved properly could be described as fortunate to have entered a Christian household. She had food, shelter, wages, and protection from the streets. This was not entirely false, which made it more powerful. A position could save a woman from immediate hunger. Wages could keep an older mother from the workhouse. A decent employer might be less harsh than a factory owner, a lodging house keeper, or the parish authorities. The poor often made decisions not between good and bad, but between bad and worse. Victorian society understood this and called it order. The law mostly reinforced the distance. Domestic service was governed less by tenderness than by hierarchy, reference, reputation, and dismissal. A servant's future depended heavily on character. A bad reference could close doors. A rumor of immorality could ruin her prospects. Pregnancy outside marriage could turn a working girl from employable to suspect almost overnight. Even a married servant with a child could be seen as inconvenient in a household that wanted full attention, full availability, and full obedience. The home that praised motherhood did not necessarily make room for the servant's motherhood. That was the contradiction hidden in plain sight. Middle-class family life depended on women who were expected to care deeply for children, but not too visibly for their own. The ideal servant was affectionate without being possessive, present without belonging, devoted without making claims. She was to love the child enough to be useful, but not enough to disturb the boundaries of class. And so a rich household could look peaceful from the street. The brass knocker shone. The curtains were clean. The children were dressed, fed, and watched. The mother received visitors with composure. The father could believe his house was morally ordered. The accounts might show only wages paid, clothing provided, a servant hired, a nursery maintained. But an account book has narrow columns. It could record £2, 5 shillings, and a new apron. It could not record the weight of hearing another woman's baby call for you in the dark, while your own child learned not to expect your hands. Her name might have been Ellen, or Mary, or Sarah, or Jane. The record may not keep her whole life. It may keep only the part that mattered to someone else. Female servant, age 19, nursemaid, unmarried, general servant, good character, young woman seeking situation. Wet nurse available, healthy, recently confined. The words are small, but behind them stands a life pressed into the shape of necessity. She was not born into a room with a bell pull and a carpet. She may have come from a narrow court in South Warwick, a damp lane in Manchester, a mining village in Wales, a farm cottage in Yorkshire, or one of the overcrowded streets where families slept behind shop fronts and workshop doors. Her childhood would have taught her early that comfort belonged to other people. By 12 or 13, many girls were already earning something. By 14, they might be in service, carrying coal, scrubbing steps, blacking grates, cleaning boots, emptying slops, and learning that a mistake could be corrected with a sharp word before breakfast. The servant's day began before the family's day. That was one of the first lessons. You rose in the dark so someone else could wake to order. If she was lucky, she had a mother who tried to keep her clean, fed, and respectable long enough to enter a decent household. If she was unlucky, she came through parish care, charity school, relatives who could not keep her, or employers who changed often. A girl's reputation was a kind of fragile currency. It could be earned slowly and lost quickly. To be considered honest, modest, sober, and obedient was not just moral praise, it was survival. Then came the child. Perhaps she had been courted by a groom who promised marriage and disappeared when the swelling began. Perhaps she had been assaulted by a man whose name carried more protection than hers. Perhaps she had been a married woman whose husband had died, enlisted, deserted, drunk his wages, or failed to find work. Victorian judgment did not always care for distinctions. A poor woman with a baby was often treated as evidence of her own failure. The baby changed everything. Before, she could hire herself out with both arms free. After, every employer saw not only her face, but the unseen burden attached to her. A woman with a child might need time, milk, visits, money, or mercy. These were not qualities employers were eager to purchase. A household wanted labor that arrived whole, not a worker whose heart and body were divided somewhere outside the back door. And so she learned the arithmetic of poverty. A room cost money, bread cost money, coal cost money, soap cost money, a bit of milk cost money, a burial, if the worst came, cost money too. Even love required coins when the landlord knocked. She could try laundry work, but laundries were brutal places for women with infants. Steam filled the lungs. Hands cracked in hot water and soda. Hours ran long. There might be no safe corner for a baby. She could take in sewing, but the pay was often so low that a woman might stitch until her eyes burned and still not earn enough for food. She could sell small goods, clean by the day, go charring in houses that needed temporary help, or plead with relatives already crowded to the walls. The parish waited in the distance like a threat. The workhouse was supposed to be a last resort, and its shadow hung over poor families with particular force. It offered food and shelter at the price of separation, discipline, shame, and loss of independence. For many, entering its doors meant admitting that private life had failed. Mothers feared it not only because it was harsh, but because it turned family into administration. A girl who wanted to avoid that door had to say yes somewhere else. The advertisement might appear in a newspaper among dozens of small needs and offers. Wanted, a steady young woman as nursemaid. Must have good references. Wanted, a wet nurse. Healthy, respectable, and without encumbrance preferred. Wanted, a young person accustomed to children. In those last words, without encumbrance, an entire child could disappear. If she answered in person, she would arrive through the servant's entrance or wait in a passage, hat in hand, trying not to show too much nervousness. Her dress might be clean but worn at the cuffs. Her boots might be polished beyond their strength. She would know that everything about her was being read: her speech, her hands, her skin, her teeth, her posture, her eyes if she lowered them too much or not enough. Questions would come: where was she last employed? Why did she leave? Could she sew? Could she wash a child properly? Was she accustomed to infants? Was she strong? Was she healthy? Did she attend church? Did she drink? Did she have followers? Did she have family nearby? Was there any trouble in her past? If she had a baby, that question could not remain hidden for long. Milk in the body leaves its own evidence. So does exhaustion. So does grief. In cases where a wet nurse was sought, the inspection could become more intimate. Reformers and doctors wrote of nurses being assessed for health, cleanliness, temperament, and the age of their own infants. Some employers wanted assurance that the woman's milk was suitable. Some feared disease. Some feared bad morals passing through the breast, as though character itself could travel in milk. The servant might stand while strangers discussed her body with the cool practicality used for hiring a horse, choosing meat, or inspecting linen. She needed the position, so she answered, "Yes, ma'am." "No, ma'am." "I can manage, ma'am." The wage might sound like deliverance when spoken aloud. Food included, a bed in the house, perhaps a uniform or clothing allowance, perhaps a half day out on Sunday if the child was well and the mistress permitted it, perhaps enough coin sent home to keep a mother, sister, or paid minder from turning the baby away. But no one hired her whole sorrow, only her usefulness, if accepted. She might return to her lodging and look at her own child with a terror that had no proper place in polite speech. The decision had already been made by rent, hunger, reputation, and the narrowness of female work. She could kiss the baby's head. She could promise to send money. She could leave instructions with a grandmother, an aunt, a neighbor, or a woman who took in infants for payment. She could wrap a shawl tighter around the child and tell herself that this was temporary. Many poor mothers survived by believing in temporary things: temporary separation, temporary debt, temporary shame, temporary hunger. Yet the system knew how to stretch temporary into childhood. On the morning she entered the rich household, she carried perhaps a box, perhaps only a bundle. Her belongings were small enough to fit into another family's corner: a comb, a brush, a spare chemise, a Bible or prayer book if she had one, a ribbon from home, a letter folded until the creases turned soft, maybe a tiny garment belonging to the child she could not bring with her. The house would be larger than any place that had ever belonged to her. It would smell of coal smoke, beeswax, cooked meat, starch, damp wool, and soap. She would be shown where to sleep, where to wash, which stairs to use, which bell to answer, which rooms she must not enter unless called. The rules would not all be spoken. Some had to be learned by embarrassment, and somewhere above or behind a half-open nursery door, another baby waited. Not cruel, not guilty, only small, hungry, and protected by money. The young woman stepped into service because refusal had become a luxury. The household did not need to force her. It only needed the world outside to be harder than the world within. That was how the bargain began. The bargain did not wound her all at once. It did what poverty so often does. It offered her a coin in one hand and took something quieter from the other. In the rich house, she had what the street could not guarantee: A bed, even if it was narrow, meals, even if they were eaten below stairs and after the family had finished. A roof, even if the roof belonged to people who could dismiss her with a sentence. A regular wage, even if much of it had already been promised before it touched her palm. This was why the arrangement could be defended. What else was she to do? That question followed poor women everywhere. It sounded practical, even merciful, when spoken by those who had never had to answer it with their own bodies. What else was she to do if her own baby needed feeding, if her rent was overdue, if parish relief came with shame, if laundry work would break her hands, if sewing paid too little, if factory work had no cradle beside the machine, if no employer wanted a servant who carried her motherhood openly? What else was she to do? The cruelty hid inside the question because every answer was already damaged. She could keep the baby with her and refuse service. Then she risked hunger, eviction, dependence on relatives who were poor themselves, or the workhouse gates where private grief became public record. She could enter service and leave the baby with kin. Then she risked becoming a visitor in her own child's life, appearing on permitted afternoons with coins, apologies, and milk that belonged to another household's timetable. She could pay a woman to mind the child, if she could afford it. Then she had to trust a stranger whose poverty might be only a little less desperate than her own. In some documented cases, poor infants were placed with dry nurses, women paid to feed and keep babies without breast milk. Sometimes these arrangements were decent, sometimes they were not. Reformers wrote grimly of infants kept on watered milk, bread soaked in weak tea, patent foods, or mixtures that filled the stomach without nourishing the body. Bottles could be difficult to clean. Milk spoiled easily. Disease moved quickly through crowded rooms. A baby who cried too much could be quieted, neglected, or passed from one exhausted set of arms to another. The employer's baby, meanwhile, might be weighed, watched, warmed, and discussed with care. The maid's baby might be explained as unfortunate if it failed to thrive. There is a particular bitterness in a mother being hired for the very tenderness she cannot afford to keep at home. She is valuable because she knows how to hold a child. She is trusted because her hands have already learned small bones, soft skulls, frightened cries, hot foreheads, restless sleep. Her experience makes her useful. Her poverty makes her available. Her child makes her desperate. The household benefits from all three. If she is nursing another woman's infant, the trade becomes more intimate still. Her milk, made by the birth of her own child, is redirected upward through class. A bodily supply meant by nature for one baby is purchased for another. The language around it may be careful and clean. The mistress may be ill, delicate, advised not to nurse, unwilling to spoil her figure, or simply accustomed to a world where bodily labor can be delegated. The doctor may speak in terms of infant health. The family may speak of necessity. The nurse may be praised if the child gains weight. But somewhere else, another infant loses the first claim. Not always completely, not always fatally. History is rarely so neat. Some mothers managed to send money home and return when they could. Some relatives fought to keep the child alive. Some hired nurses were allowed visits. Some poor children survived the separation and grew into adults who carried no written testimony of the danger. The arrangement did not always end in catastrophe. That is part of what made it endure. A system does not need every life to break in order to be cruel. It only needs enough broken lives to be accepted as the cost of keeping respectable life comfortable. The young woman may try to reason with herself. She may tell herself that wages will buy good milk, that her mother knows babies, that her sister is kind, that the child is strong, that Sunday will come soon, that a few months of service will prevent years of destitution. She may fold her fear into routine because fear cannot be allowed to interfere with duties. A bell rings. The rich child is awake. Her body moves before thought. She crosses the nursery, lifts the baby, checks the binder, adjusts the blanket, warms the food, or brings him to her breast. She feels his weight settle into the crook of her arm. She hears the small animal sound of feeding. She smells his clean scalp, scented faintly with soap and milk and warm cloth. The tenderness rises without permission. This is the moral contradiction that no household account could settle. She may love him, not in the way his mother loves him, perhaps, and not without pain, but after enough nights, enough fevers, enough walks through cold rooms, enough cries soothed against her shoulder, feeling nothing would be impossible. Children do not understand class boundaries. A baby reaches for warmth. A servant supplies it. Attachment forms in the spaces where society insists only employment exists. Then guilt comes. If she loves this child, is she betraying her own? If she resents this child, is she wicked? If she sends money home, is that motherhood? If she stays away, is that abandonment? If she returns, who will employ her? Victorian morality often gave poor women impossible tests and then blamed them for failing. A servant mother was expected to be devoted to work and devoted to family. Obedient to employers and morally responsible for children she could not keep beside her. Grateful for wages and ashamed of needing them, she had to be respectable enough to serve the rich, but poor enough to accept conditions the rich would never tolerate. The arrangement could even make her own grief look like misconduct. If she was distracted, she was careless. If she wept, she was unstable. If she asked for time off, she was troublesome. If she concealed her child, she was deceitful. If she spoke of the child too often, she was improper, bringing private matters into a house that valued discretion. The ideal servant had no history heavy enough to inconvenience the family. So she learned silence. She learned to answer when spoken to keep her face composed, to place the baby back in his cot gently, even when her thoughts had traveled to another room across the city. She learned to read signs from the mistress's mood. She learned which cries would bring blame, which stains must be hidden quickly, which hour was safest to ask for her wages, which Sunday might be refused because the family had guests or the child was unwell. Every choice narrowed around her. If her own baby sickened, she might receive a message too late. A neighbor's boy might arrive at the servant's entrance with a note folded badly in his hand. Her mother might write that the child had a cough, or would not feed, or needed medicine, or had been taken with diarrhea, or had grown thin. The words might be simple because paper costs money and grief does not always know spelling. The maid would stand with the note under her apron and wait for permission to leave. Permission. That word alone tells much of the story. She had given birth, but another household now controlled her hours. She had a child, but another child had first claim on her labor. She had wages, but the wages existed because she was not where she most wanted to be. The money was real, so was the thing it could never buy back. If permission was granted, she might hurry through wet streets in her servant dress, trying not to attract notice, trying not to think of how long the journey felt. If permission was refused, she would return to the nursery and continue rocking the child whose health justified her absence from the one who needed her. This was not always spoken of as cruelty. It was spoken of as duty. The mistress had duties. The servant had duties. The poor had duties. Everyone had duties but they did not weigh the same. A wealthy mother's duty could be supervised, advised, softened, and shared. A poor mother's duty could be made impossible and then judged from a distance. By the time the young woman understood the full cost, the arrangement might already have settled around her like a second skin. Her own child's face might begin to change between visits. Babies alter quickly. The cheeks narrow. The eyes become more knowing. The cry changes. A mother who is absent for weeks may return to find that the body she remembers has moved on without her permission. The child may cling to the grandmother instead. The child may stare at her as though she is a familiar visitor, not the center of the world. That small hesitation can hurt more than a shouted insult. It tells her that poverty has not only taken her time, it has taken recognition. And still, when the rich baby cries in the night, she rises, because the household sleeps, because the wage is needed, because the reference must remain clean, because another month may save them, because refusing for women like her was often the privilege of people who had never been cornered by love and hunger at the same time. The nursery was not the soft place that paintings later made it seem. It could be warm, yes. It could be furnished with rugs, curtains, painted chairs, shelves of toys, framed prints, and a small bed where a child slept under careful watch. But for the woman employed there, it was also a workplace with no clean edge between labor and feeling. She did not leave the work when she entered the room. The room was the work. The child was the work. Her patience, her voice, her arms, her sleep, even her tenderness, all became part of the service. Morning often began before the house admitted that morning had arrived. Coal had to be carried. The grate had to be cleared and relit. Ash had to be swept carefully so dust did not settle on the child's things. Water had to be fetched or heated. Clothes had to be warmed, shaken out, inspected for damp, and laid near the fire. Napkins had to be counted. Flannel bands, petticoats, socks, little gowns, bibs, caps, and boots had to be ready in their proper order. A nursery might look peaceful when the family entered, but peace had usually been manufactured by tired hands. The child woke. At once, the room belonged to him, if he was an infant. She washed him with careful strokes, supporting the head, wiping the folds of skin where milk collected sourly, dusting powder, changing linen, pinning cloth without pricking him, and listening for the sound of the mistress's step outside the door. If he was older, he might resist dressing, kick at stockings, cry at hair brushing, smear breakfast on his cuffs, demand a toy, or call for his mother when his mother was not expected to appear. The maid learned the geography of small needs. The cup must be near enough, the fire guard secure. The window opened a little, but not too much. The chamber pot hidden quickly. The toys arranged, but not scattered when visitors came. The child's face clean before he was presented downstairs. His temper managed before anyone decided the nursery was poorly run. Good care was supposed to look effortless. That was one of its cruelties. If she performed well, people noticed the child, not the work. They saw a clean boy, a settled baby, a little girl with smooth hair and tied sash. They praised the mother's household. They praised the family's order. They might say the nursery was well managed. The maid herself remained in the background, like the brush that had smoothed the hair or the fire that had warmed the room. If something went wrong, she became visible immediately. A rash, a fall, a stain, a missing button, a cough that worsened, a child who cried too long when guests were present, a scratch on the cheek, a broken toy, a late walk, a dirty pinafore. Suddenly her character could be questioned. Was she attentive? Was she clean? Was she rough? Was she lazy? Had she allowed the child to take cold? Had she been gossiping with another servant? Had she thought too much of her own concerns? The household trusted her with its most precious possession, but not with full dignity. She might sleep in or near the nursery, close enough to wake at every sound. This made her indispensable and trapped. The baby's smallest movement could pull her from sleep. A whimper, a cough, a wet cloth, a feverish restlessness. Even when the child slept, she listened with the thin attention of someone who cannot fully surrender to rest. Night turned her body into an alarm bell. In winter, the room smelled of coal smoke, warm wool, lamp oil, soap, damp linen, and the faint sourness of milk. In summer, it could smell of dust, hot bedding, chamber pots, stale breath, and the city entering through an open window. London air carried horse dung, smoke, drains, river damp, frying fat, and the human closeness of crowded streets. The rich could soften these smells, but not banish them completely. They clung to fabric and hair. The child's food brought its own routine. Bread and milk, broth, porridge, egg, weak tea in some households, carefully prepared mixtures for infants who were not breastfed. If she was wet nursing, Her own diet became a matter of concern, not because she deserved comfort, but because her body had become a vessel for someone else's child. What she ate, whether she rested, whether she drank, whether she seemed cheerful or low, could all be discussed as factors in the quality of service. Her body was watched for usefulness. Her grief was not considered a medical condition. When the family physician visited, she might stand nearby while he examined the child. His hands belonged naturally in the room. His opinion carried weight. He might ask about stools, sleep, feeding, crying, vomiting, heat of skin, and fretfulness. She would answer carefully. Too much detail might seem impertinent. Too little might seem negligent. A servant learned that truth must be shaped to rank. The mistress's inspections could be just as tense. Drawers opened, linen counted, clothing examined, the child's nails checked, hair inspected, the room assessed for order, smell, warmth, and discipline. A good nursery maid was expected to be affectionate but not familiar, obedient but not dull, cheerful but not noisy, firm but not harsh, devoted but never demanding. She was to form attachment without claiming relationship. The child did not understand this rule. He might reach for her when frightened. He might calm more quickly in her arms than in his mother's. He might call for her in the night with the absolute trust of a small creature who knows only the person who comes. He might press his face into her apron, fall asleep against her shoulder, or bring her a broken toy as though she alone could mend the world. Those moments could warm her and punish her at once. For there was another child somewhere beyond the nursery walls, and memory did not obey class arrangement. While she buttoned a rich child's boots, she might remember bare feet at home, while she coaxed a spoonful of broth into one mouth. She might wonder whether another had been fed watered milk, while she sang a soft hymn to settle one infant. The tune might break inside her because it belonged first to a cradle she no longer stood beside, yet she could not allow the break to show. Servants were surrounded by people, and still often alone. The nursery separated her from adult company. Below stairs, other servants had their own burdens and hierarchies. A cook might resent nursery demands. A housemaid might mock softness toward the children. A butler or housekeeper might enforce rules with the authority of those who had survived long enough to manage others. The mistress might speak kindly one day and sharply the next. The child might love her in the morning and strike her in a tantrum by afternoon. She had no secure place to put her feelings. If the child said something cruel, repeating what he had heard about servants, she had to absorb it. If he asked whether she had a baby, she had to choose her answer carefully. If he touched her face and called her his, a forbidden sweetness might rise in her throat. If he later ran past her toward his mother in a clean gown and perfume, she had to step back into her proper shadow. The family might reward her with cast-off clothing, a half-crown at Christmas, a better cap, or praise spoken as though praise could feed all losses. She's very good with the children. That sentence could sound like kindness. It could also sound like a lock-turning, because being good with children made it harder to leave. It made her useful. It tied her reputation to her endurance. If she complained, she risked being ungrateful. If she broke down, she risked being unsuitable. If she asked to visit her own child more often, she risked reminding the household that her heart was not fully theirs. The day moved in circles. Dress the child, feed the child, walk the child, wash the child, quiet the child, mend the child's clothes, report on the child, guard the child from stares, drafts, dirt, strangers, bad habits, and too much crying. At noon, perhaps a walk in the square or park, where other nursemaids pushed perambulators and watched one another with the tired recognition of women wearing clean aprons over complicated lives. They stood in public as symbols of family comfort, while their own stories remained private and precarious. By evening, the child was undressed, washed, prayed over, and laid down. The house softened. The family dined. Voices rose from below, then faded. Carriage wheels passed outside. Somewhere, plates were cleared. Glasses washed, fires checked, doors locked. In the nursery, she sat in the half-dark with mending in her lap, listening to the breathing of a child who would never remember the worst of what she gave. Her back ached. Her breasts might ache. Her hands smelled of soap, milk, coal, and child skin. Her eyes burned from want of sleep. In her pocket, there might be a letter she had read too many times, or a coin she meant to send home, or a ribbon from the baby she could not hold tonight. The rich child turned in his sleep. She rose at once. That was the terrible intimacy of the arrangement. It did not merely take her labor. It trained her love into obedience. It made her tenderness profitable. It asked her to become a shelter for someone else's future, while her own future waited outside, cold, uncertain, and much less protected. And by morning, the nursery would be clean again. The end did not always announce itself as tragedy. Sometimes it came as a decision made in another room. The child was old enough now. The family was moving. The mistress wanted a different kind of servant. A new nurse had been recommended. Money had tightened. A younger girl would cost less. A governess was being engaged. The baby no longer needed nursing. The household had found no fault exactly, but no longer required the same service. That phrase could remove a woman from a life she had inhabited for months or years. No longer required. It sounded tidy. It protected everyone from naming what had happened. She had risen in the night, fed, washed, carried, soothed, watched, and worried. She had learned the child's breathing, his temper, his favorite cup, his frightened cry, his first words, the way fever touched his cheeks before anyone else noticed. Then one day her presence could be reduced to a completed transaction. Wages paid, reference written, box packed. The child might not understand. If he was very young, he might cry when she left and then settle into the next pair of arms. Children survive by attaching again. That survival can break the heart of the person who must go. If he was older, he might ask where she was going, whether she would come back, why she could not stay. He might cling to her skirt in the passage, confused by adult arrangements that had always governed his world but never needed his consent. The mistress might soften the moment with a gift, a shawl, a dress length, a small sum, a prayer book, a kind sentence spoken with moist eyes. She may even feel genuine regret. Many employers were not monsters. Some had affection for the women who served them. Some knew the children would miss a familiar face. Some believed they were doing what households had always done, and perhaps doing it more kindly than others. That was why the wound was so difficult to accuse. The system did not need to hate her. It only needed her to be temporary. She would descend the back stairs with her bundle. The front rooms remained arranged for family life. The nursery might already be changing. A drawer emptied. A bed assigned to someone else. A new cap laid out. The child's routine adjusted. In houses of comfort, absence could be managed quickly because there was always another poor woman outside the door. For the servant, leaving meant stepping back into uncertainty. If her own child had lived, the reunion was not always simple. The baby she left might now be a walking toddler, shy of her touch. The grandmother or paid nurse might know the child's habits better. The child might cry for another woman at night. The mother might feel gratitude, jealousy, guilt, and relief in the same breath. Poverty had not erased love, but it had interrupted recognition. She might kneel and open her arms. The child might hesitate. That hesitation could contain the whole cost of the arrangement. If the child had sickened while she served, she might return to a smaller life than the one she had imagined saving. Records from poor districts, infirmaries, workhouses, and burial registers suggest how easily an infant could vanish from the future. A name written once, an age measured in weeks or months, a cause recorded in plain language. Diarrhea, wasting, bronchitis, convulsions, debility, fever. The words do not cry on the page. They leave that work to the reader. In some cases, A mother may have been told that nothing could have been done. The room was bad. The milk turned. The weather was cruel. The child was weak from the beginning. Such explanations may have been partly true. Poor children did die in frightening numbers in the 19th century, especially where overcrowding, contaminated food, disease, and unsafe feeding practices gathered around infancy like a net. But truth can still be incomplete. A rich child's survival had been treated as a household project. A poor child's survival had been treated as a private gamble. If she had served as a wet nurse, her loss could carry a second bitterness. Her milk helped another child grow. That child might become a schoolboy with polished boots, a young gentleman in a stiff collar, a woman prepared for marriage, a name carried forward in family memory. Her own child, if gone, might leave behind no portrait, no lock of hair preserved in a velvet case, no story told over dinner, except perhaps a short sentence from a tired relative. She had a little one once. That may be all. The maid herself did not always recover either. Long service could leave the body worn down by sleeplessness. Poor rest, damp rooms, emotional strain, and the constant demand to be gentle under pressure. If she lost a child, grief did not free her from work. There were still wages to earn, references to protect, places to seek. Mourning was easier for those who could afford time. For a poor woman, sorrow often had to be folded and carried with the laundry. She might go into another household and begin again. Another child, another nursery, another set of rules, another mistress, another name called in the night. She might grow older inside other people's families while her own remained scattered, fragile, or unreachable. Years could pass this way, with her tenderness appearing in many childhoods and her name secured in none. The child she raised in comfort might remember her faintly, a smell of starch and soap, a song before sleep, a roughened hand, a face glimpsed from below. Perhaps, in adulthood, he might speak of my old nurse with affection, as though she belonged to the soft furniture of childhood. He might not know where she went. He might not know she had a child. He might not know that his earliest safety was built partly from her separation. The record would not insist that he know that is one of history's quieter injustices. It preserves houses, portraits, wills, family trees, and the names of children who inherited. It is less careful with the women who carried those children through fever and fear. Servants appear and disappear in census lines, wage books, advertisements, institutional registers, and parish records. Their emotional labor rarely receives a sentence. When the arrangement ended, the household could close the nursery door. For her, no door closed so neatly. She carried away the habits of listening. She carried the reflex to wake at a child's cry. She carried the memory of another woman's son or daughter warm against her chest. She carried the ache of what her wages had not protected. She carried, perhaps, a reference that said she was sober, honest, and good with children. Good with children, a small phrase. A whole life reduced to usefulness. The practice did not disappear in a single moral awakening. It weakened slowly, unevenly, under pressure from many directions. Medical understanding changed. Public health campaigns began to expose the dangers of unsafe infant feeding, dirty bottles, contaminated milk, and overcrowded lodging rooms. Reformers wrote about infant mortality, baby farming, workhouse children, servant conditions, and the hidden costs of respectable domestic life. Newspapers sometimes carried scandals that made private arrangements briefly visible to the public eye. Laws and inspections grew firmer in some areas, though often too late for those already harmed. Technology also changed the household. Safer feeding methods, improved milk supply, and later better infant care reduced the dependence on wet nursing in many families. Domestic service itself shifted as wages, education, factory work, shop work, and new forms of employment opened different, though still difficult, paths for young women. The great Victorian house, with its army of servants and its careful separation of upstairs comfort from downstairs labor, began to lose some of its unquestioned authority. But change did not mean justice for the women who had already lived inside the arrangement. Many of them left no memoir. They did not become reform leaders. They did not sit for portraits with their own children around them. They did not have family papers preserved in boxes tied with ribbon. Their grief entered the record only when it touched an institution, a court, a parish office, a hospital ward, or a burial ledger. The rest remained in rooms where no one thought to write it down. Respectable society often remembered the child who rose. It remembered the son educated at school, the daughter prepared for marriage. The family line continued. The nursery photographs, the christening gown kept for later generations. It remembered the household as loving, orderly, and refined. It remembered motherly devotion in the language of class, with the mistress at the center and the servant placed softly in the background, if she appeared at all. Yet the warm nursery was never only a room of innocence. It was also a place where poor women's time was converted into rich children's safety, where affection was expected but not fully honored, where motherhood could be praised in one woman and made inconvenient in another, where a servant's tenderness helped build a family story that did not have to include her own. Imagine the child grown older, looking back through a bright haze of memory. He may remember a cradle near the fire, clean sheets, a woman's arms, a song at night, the smell of soap and coal smoke. He may remember being loved. He may not remember that love had a wage. He may not know that beyond the heavy curtains. Another child waited in a colder room, learning the first lesson poverty teaches, that even a mother's arms can be rented away by need. The rich child's name may remain in the family Bible. His portrait may hang in a hallway. His descendants may know the house, the street, the school, the profession, the inheritance. The maid may survive only as a first name in Census Inc., or not even that. She may be servant, nurse, female, widow, unmarried, formerly employed. Her child may be a line in a burial book, a small age beside a small name, or a life that continued without ever being asked what it cost to begin so far from its mother. The household called her good. The records called her useful. The child she raised may have called her dear. But history, if it listens carefully, hears the quieter truth beneath all of that. She did not vanish because she had no importance. She vanished because her importance was consumed by other people's lives, folded into clean linen, carried up the back stairs, and mistaken for duty until there was almost nothing left of her except the care she gave away.